Marcus Johnson adjusted the cuffs of his navy blue suit as he stood outside the grand entrance of the city's most luxurious hotel. The towering glass doors reflected hundreds of sparkling lights from inside, where one of the most exclusive charity galas of the year was already underway. Expensive cars lined the entrance, and elegantly dressed guests walked across the red carpet, greeting photographers with practiced smiles. Marcus took a slow breath, not because he was nervous about the wealthy crowd, but because he wanted his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, to feel comfortable. Tonight was a special evening, and he wanted her to remember it for the right reasons. Lily stood beside him wearing a simple light blue dress that her grandmother had carefully stitched by hand. She looked up at her father with bright eyes filled with excitement. "Dad," she whispered, "this place looks like a castle." Marcus smiled warmly. "It does, doesn't it? But remember, sweetheart, the people inside are just people. Fancy buildings don't make anyone more important." She nodded seriously before slipping her small hand into his. That tiny gesture reminded Marcus why he worked so hard every day. Since losing his wife years earlier, he had raised Lily alone. Every decision he made revolved around giving her a life filled with love, honesty, and opportunity. There had been difficult years when money barely covered rent and groceries. He had worked late nights developing educational software while Lily slept beside him on a small couch in his office. Slowly, his company had grown, not because he chased fortune, but because he believed every child deserved access to quality education. As they entered the ballroom, soft classical music floated through the air. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling like frozen waterfalls, casting shimmering reflections across polished marble floors. Round tables were decorated with white roses and silver candles. Waiters in immaculate uniforms moved gracefully through the crowd carrying trays of sparkling drinks and elegant appetizers. Many guests glanced toward Marcus and Lily. Some smiled kindly at the little girl, while others quietly examined Marcus from head to toe. His suit was perfectly clean and well-tailored, yet what drew attention was his natural, tightly coiled hair. He wore it proudly, neatly shaped but longer than the conservative styles favored by many executives in attendance. Marcus had long stopped worrying about strangers' opinions. His appearance reflected who he was, and he refused to change himself simply to satisfy outdated expectations. Lily noticed a few people staring. "Dad, are they looking at us?" Marcus gently squeezed her hand. "Sometimes people stare because they aren't used to seeing someone different. Never let someone else's eyes tell you your worth." She smiled and seemed reassured. A volunteer greeted them warmly and escorted them toward their reserved table near the front of the ballroom. Marcus thanked her politely before helping Lily into her chair. Several guests introduced themselves, recognizing his name from recent news articles praising his company's educational initiatives. The conversations were pleasant, filled with questions about his work helping schools in underserved communities. Across the ballroom stood Victor Langford, a billionaire investor known for his immense wealth and intimidating personality. At 58 years old, Victor had built an empire through aggressive business deals and was accustomed to being the center of attention wherever he went. Dressed in an expensive black tuxedo with polished shoes that gleamed beneath the chandeliers, he carried himself with unmistakable confidence. Victor noticed Marcus almost immediately. He leaned toward a group of executives standing beside him and quietly asked, "Who's that?" One executive replied, "That's Marcus Johnson. He's the founder of Bright Future Learning. His company has donated educational technology to hundreds of schools." Victor barely listened. His attention remained fixed on Marcus's hairstyle. With an amused smirk, Victor walked across the ballroom, followed by several curious guests who sensed that something entertaining might happen. Conversations gradually faded as people noticed the billionaire approaching Marcus's table. Marcus stood respectfully, assuming Victor wished to introduce himself. Instead, Victor slowly looked Marcus up and down before shaking his head. "Interesting choice," Victor said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Marcus remained calm. "Good evening." Victor folded his arms. "Nice suit. Expensive enough to fit in here." Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Victor tilted his head while staring directly at Marcus's hair. "But your hair," he said with obvious disgust. "Your hair disgusts me. You come to one of the most formal events in the city looking like that? Didn't anyone tell you professionalism still matters?" The ballroom fell almost completely silent. Forks stopped moving. Musicians hesitated. Even waiters paused in place. Lily instinctively stepped closer to her father, tightening her grip on his hand. Marcus could feel dozens of eyes fixed on him, waiting for an angry response. Many expected him to defend himself, argue, or walk away in humiliation. Instead, Marcus slowly knelt beside Lily. He smiled gently at her. "Sweetheart," he asked softly, "what do you always tell me about my hair?" Without hesitation, Lily grinned. "I love your hair because it's part of you. It makes you look brave." Marcus stood again and faced Victor with complete composure. "My daughter loves my hair," he said evenly. "She judges people by their kindness, not by whether they look like everyone else. I've discovered that's a much wiser way to live." The silence deepened. Several guests lowered their eyes, embarrassed not by Marcus, but by Victor's behavior. Victor gave a short laugh, convinced he had embarrassed Marcus. But something unexpected had already begun to happen. The room was no longer looking at Marcus with judgment. They were looking at him with respect. The silence lingered long after Marcus finished speaking. Around the ballroom, guests who had witnessed the exchange looked from Marcus to Victor, unsure how the billionaire would respond. Victor forced a brief laugh and adjusted the sleeve of his tuxedo, pretending the moment had amused him rather than unsettled him. "Well," Victor said with a dismissive shrug, "confidence is certainly free." A few people gave polite chuckles, but the laughter quickly faded. The atmosphere had changed. What Victor expected to be an entertaining joke had instead revealed something uncomfortable about his own character. Marcus simply nodded. "I hope you enjoy the evening," he replied calmly. He guided Lily back to their table without another word. As they sat down, Lily looked at her father with concern. "Were you sad because of what he said?" Marcus smiled reassuringly. "No, sweetheart. People sometimes say hurtful things because they judge what they don't understand. We can't control their words, but we can always control our response." Lily thought about his answer before smiling. "I'm glad you didn't yell." Marcus laughed softly. "So am I." Dinner service soon began. Elegant plates were placed before each guest, while conversations slowly returned throughout the ballroom. However, many discussions centered on what had just happened. Several business leaders quietly expressed admiration for Marcus's composure. Others shook their heads at Victor's unnecessary remark. An elderly woman seated nearby leaned toward Marcus. "I've attended these galas for 20 years, she said. "I've never seen anyone answer cruelty with such dignity." Marcus thanked her politely. "I'm simply trying to set a good example for my daughter." The woman looked toward Lily. "You're succeeding." Across the room, Victor continued greeting influential investors, but something felt different. He noticed people glancing toward Marcus more often than toward him. The attention that usually surrounded the billionaire had quietly shifted. A few minutes later, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. The orchestra lowered its volume as bright lights illuminated the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host announced, "thank you for supporting tonight's charity gala. Every donation made this evening will help expand educational opportunities for children across the country." Applause echoed through the ballroom. The host smiled. "Tonight we are also recognizing several individuals whose generosity has changed thousands of lives." Awards were presented to community leaders, teachers, and volunteers. Each recipient received warm applause before returning to their seats. Finally, the host paused. "Our next honoree has spent years helping children who might otherwise have been forgotten." A large screen behind the stage lit up. Photographs appeared one after another.
Marcus teaching coding classes in a small public school. Marcus repairing donated computers with a group of teenagers. Marcus reading books to children inside a neighborhood library. Marcus carrying boxes of laptops into classrooms after floods had destroyed school equipment. Soft music filled the ballroom. Many guests watched with growing surprise. The host continued. When his business became successful, he could have focused entirely on profit. Instead, he quietly invested millions into education, often refusing public recognition. Another video began. A school principal appeared on the screen. Mr. Johnson never asked for publicity. One day he simply arrived with computers our students desperately needed. A teacher smiled through tears. Some of our children had never touched a computer before meeting Marcus. A university student appeared next. I grew up in a shelter. Marcus's scholarship program gave me the chance to study engineering. Today I'm graduating because someone believed in me. Another former student spoke. He didn't just teach us technology. He taught us confidence. The ballroom remained completely silent. Victor slowly turned toward the screen. His confident expression disappeared. He had assumed Marcus was merely another entrepreneur attending an expensive event. He had no idea the man had quietly transformed so many lives. The host returned to the microphone. Please welcome this year's Human Impact Award recipient, Marcus Johnson. For a brief second, Marcus looked surprised. He hadn't expected to receive an award. Lily's eyes widened. Dad! That's you. The audience erupted into applause. Then people began rising from their chairs. Within moments, nearly the entire ballroom stood in a standing ovation. The applause grew louder and louder. Marcus looked around humbly before taking Lily's hand. Come with me, he whispered. Together they walked toward the stage. As Marcus passed through the crowd, many guests reached out to shake his hand. Others smiled warmly. Some quietly thanked him for inspiring them. Victor remained seated. He watched as everyone honored the same man he had mocked only minutes earlier. Marcus accepted the Crystal Award before stepping to the microphone. He looked at the audience for a moment before speaking. When people hear the word success, he began, they often think about money, titles, or expensive buildings. The room became completely still. My daughter reminds me every day that success is much simpler than that. He smiled toward Lily. Success is helping someone stand a little taller after they've fallen. Many guests nodded. It's choosing kindness when criticism would be easier. The audience listened closely. It's believing every child deserves opportunity, regardless of where they were born or how much money their family has. A wave of applause interrupted him. Marcus waited before continuing. And if someone judges you by your appearance instead of your character, remember this. Hair grows. Fashion changes. Wealth comes and goes. But integrity stays with you for life. The ballroom exploded into another standing ovation. Victor lowered his eyes. For the first time in many years, the richest man in the room realized that respect could never be purchased. It had to be earned.